the more flexible or Gumby-ish that we are without stability is the more vulnerable to injury we are. Okay. And that is such an important thing that we have to really accept and adopt into our mindset, because if we're in this idea that I need to be more flexible, more mobile, I need to be able to be more Gumby, but we're not taking into account the stability piece, what happens is that we keep encouraging this vulnerability to injury.
Welcome to the Exercise is Health podcast, where we're talking about exercise, health, and the interconnectedness of the two. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we will be coming to you every single week from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg. Hey, and welcome back, everybody, to the Exercise is Health podcast. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we're coming to you from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg in Schaumburg, Illinois. Now, at Muscle Activation Schaumburg, we believe your health is your most valuable asset. Your health is one of the biggest influencers of the quality and quantity of time that you have. And while there are many aspects of health, our expertise is exercise. Exercise has been proven time and again to not only improve your health, but also increase your longevity and improve your quality of life. And today we have a very special episode for you, because it's actually an interview that Julie and I took part of, where we were being interviewed for one of our colleagues, one of our friends' podcast, Michael Lingenfelter. And his podcast is called The Aging Athlete Guide, and it's available on YouTube, so you can definitely check it out. But we wanted to replay the episode that we did with him as an episode on our podcast, because we thought that the episode itself has a lot of value. So we wanted you, our listener, to make sure that you were able to hear this content so you can start applying it to your own life.
Now, Michael practices out of California. He's a really good colleague of ours, and he works with obviously a lot of aging athletes, but also works heavily in the equestrian community. So this episode about flexibility and how using flexibility to stay mobile as you age can really be applied to the regular person that just wants to stay active, but also obviously his specialty, which is the equestrian community. So we hope you really enjoy this episode. It was a fun opportunity for Charlie and I to get interviewed rather than being the interviewer. So let us know your thoughts.
And if you want to check out the video version of it, we'll put a link into the show notes of that as well. But enjoy the episode that we did with Michael Lingenfelter on the Aging Athlete Guide on how flexibility works and how to stay mobile as you age.
What you're about to see is an interview with two great friends of mine, Julie and Charlie, who are very knowledgeable when it comes to improving mobility and performance, especially as you age. Now, unfortunately, the video recording captured the middle of their screen, so you'll get to see one half of Charlie and one half of Julie, but the halves combined still make one amazing person, so don't let that distract you. And enjoy the show. Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Michael Lingenfelter, and I'm here with the Aging Athlete Guy, a show on how to get the most out of yourself so you can get the most out of what you love to do without having to worry about age slowing you down. And today we're joined by Julie and Charlie Cates. Julie and Charlie Cates are the owners of Muscle Activation Schaumburg, a private boutique fitness in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, specializing in one-on-one personal training for health and muscle activation techniques. Both of them have been practicing MAT for nearly a decade and are trained in the highest level of MAT and the MAT RX process. In addition to practicing MAT, they are both mastery level resistance training specialists and certified personal trainers. Julie and Charlie believe that your health is your most valuable asset, and their clients and their community protect this asset through exercise and exercise education. They're the hosts of a weekly podcast called The Exercise is Health, where they discuss a variety of health and fitness topics, as well as interview various health experts in the Schaumburg area. They are proud parents of a 7-month-old daughter and are advocates for small businesses and small business owners in their communities through their work with the local Chamber of Commerce. And today, we are going to be exploring the importance of staying mobile and flexible as we get older, and how to effectively attain the mobility we need and how that relates to our pain and performance. So welcome, Julie and Charlie, to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us, Michael.
Man, we're really proud of this.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I've 3 years ago started the muscle activation techniques process, and my first actual treatment was with Charlie about 3 years ago. And now we're here. So Charlie and Julie, talk to me a little bit about let's just kind of define mobility and flexibility. I feel like it's a word that's thrown around so much. So let's give some context and really dive into just what that means in the first place.
Love it.
Well, to start off, I think the more popular word that you brought up was the word flexibility. And I think that most of the people in the fitness world, most of the people that are doing anything movement related, the first thing that comes to their mind when they think flexibility is
Stretching.
Of course. And so we label flexibility as our ability to stretch and how good we are at that, or how much we're able to tolerate stretching. And so it's interesting because it's actually in our brains, and probably in your brain too, Michael, that's not really what we think of when we think of flexibility. And like the first thing that comes to my mind is not stretching or yoga or how much can I touch my toes and whatnot. So I think that is the common conception of what flexibility is.
Yeah.
And then you brought up mobility, the other side.
Yeah.
When we say mobility, I think most people think of like, okay, now we're thinking of the functional trainer people that do these repetitious motions that look kind of funky,
Right.
and it's not really labeled stretching, but it's just moving. So those are the things that I think that most people define those as, or the first picture that comes in their brain.
And I think if we're taking a perspective of, all right, looking inside the body, I think the commonality between both of those terms, between flexibility and mobility, is joint motion. And so there are a lot of things that accompany joint motion, like flexibility. You might think, okay, how much can tissues elongate? Well, tissues are really only going to elongate if the joints are moving, right? And you can make the argument both ways. Joints may really move if the tissues elongate. We would make an opposite argument. But at the end of the day, when we're thinking about, okay, well, flexibility and mobility, a lot of times we're thinking kind of joint motion and how much are those joints moving? Are your hips opening up? How much shoulder motion are you getting? How much spinal motion are you getting? And then the context in which that's happening, whether it's like a static hold or more of a dynamic motion or like a slow and controlled motion. We might call that we might call it mobility drills. We might call it flexibility. But at the end of the day, I think the commonality between those two terms often ends up being like joint motion.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to improve joint motion would be our goal if we're looking to become more mobile or flexible.
I think that's oftentimes what people think about when they're thinking about trying to improve their flexibility or trying to improve their mobility, is how much can their body move. Yeah. And it's funny because you'll talk about why people are doing it, and they will give a soft tissue based reasoning, meaning like, oh, something feels tight. But at the end of the day, they're trying to get their joints to move better. So we're talking about two completely separate tissues there and systems when we're discussing it in that manner.
Got it. So it's almost this more is better mindset when it comes to flexibility, right? So with that being the thought process, is there a certain amount that we need? Is more always better? What are we looking to attain when it comes to mobility? What should be our focus for mobility or flexibility, however we want to define it?
Yeah, great question, because I think that everyone is, you're right, thinking more is better. And actually, I think that what is the best is what is appropriate, number one, and what is stable, number two. Because if you think about mobility or flexibility, and we could maybe, like what Charlie said, we could sum this up as your ability to move. And we always think your ability to move, like, how Gumby can we be? Like, how much like Gumby could we be? Is the more flexible or Gumby-ish that we are without stability, is the more vulnerable to injury we are. Okay? And that is such an important thing that we have to really accept and adopt into our mindset, because if we're in this idea that I need to be more flexible, more mobile, I need to be able to be more Gumby, but we're not taking into account the stability piece that I brought up in the beginning, what happens is that we keep encouraging this vulnerability to injury. And I think that if we do encourage this vulnerability to injury, meaning I just stretch, I do all these things, and I just try to move and never think about how stable I am, then oftentimes that will negate the entire goal of why someone's trying to be flexible, right? Usually people are like, I want to be flexible, I want to be mobile because I want to stay healthy as I age, or I want to stay being able to do the activities that I love without pain as I age, or for a long period of time, or to be able to compete. But if we consider that, hey, did you know that the more flexible you are without stability, which encouraging flexibility without stability does create more instability, also encourages vulnerability to injury, which would, which is one of the biggest reasons people stop doing exactly what they're enjoying doing or doing right now. So I think that's a big one that we never consider. And so that's why more is not always better with flexibility and mobility, because more flexibility, period, means more vulnerability to injury.
Yeah.
Got it. Now, could you you threw a great point up there, and I think we throw the word around stability like we all understand it. So I would love to be able to hear you expand a little bit upon what stability even means. What does that mean? Am I standing? Can I stand upright? Am I stable there? Like, what is that whole concept of stability and being stable?
So when I think about stability, I mean, I've taken different classes where the instructor has defined stability and da da da. But when I think of stability and how people can kind of think about what stability means in terms of their body, because you're right, this is kind of a weird thing. We think of like, oh, we have a stable surface, like that means I step on it, it doesn't tip over or break or fall over, or we think of a balance board as like, oh, it's an unstable surface. So what does stability mean when we apply it then to the human body? So in our bodies, we have these amazing things called muscles. And muscles are designed, they have one job, and that is to contract. And what happens when muscles contract is a contraction can make a limb move. It can make a limb not move, right? Like when you brace something and don't allow it to move. And so what we want, though, in the muscle system is for muscles to contract when they're supposed to contract and not contract when they're not supposed to contract. That would be a well-functioning muscle. Another thing that's important to know about muscles is that when they change positions, like what your shoulder's doing when it's by your side versus what your shoulder's doing when it's up in the air, muscles are different lengths depending on the position that your body's in. Now, it's important that your muscle can contract when it's supposed to contract and not contract when it's not supposed to contract in all the positions where a limb can go. And so what we often lose is that I'm strong and stable in very neutral positions, and I'm not very strong and stable in extreme positions. And what this will look like if you're not strong and stable in an extreme position, which, by the way, which is normally where we're stretching, where we're doing all our mobility work, where we think we can't move, where we're feeling tightness, will be the lack of the muscle's ability to contract in that position.
So one thing to add on to all this, and I think that a lot of times we can get it kind of, I don't want to say backwards, but a lot of times we see the outcome that is happening, and we think we need to like reverse engineer from that outcome to figure out the necessary steps to then avoid that outcome. And in this case, with this discussion, a lot of times when we're talking about, say, injury, and we say, all right, well, if somebody is look at, all right, somebody got injured, and all right, could their joints move really well before that? No, they weren't able to move really well before that. So that must mean that, they weren't very mobile, they weren't very flexible. So if we improve somebody's flexibility, if we improve somebody's mobility, then they should be less likely to get injured, right? And so that's kind of like the reverse engineering thing. And I think the part that we often miss, just as an industry as a whole, is in taking another step further and say, well, why might they have not been very flexible? Why might not have they been very mobile? And could it have been because they weren't very stable. And I think that's a missing question that's often asked. And so when the question like you posed comes up of like, well, how much mobility do we actually need? How much how much movement do we actually need for our joints? Well, there's definitely the components that Julie talked about. It's like, all right, what's appropriate and where are they stable? I think another component that's super appropriate to talk about is, look, your joints have to move. your joints are lined with hyaline cartilage, okay, which is why they can move smoothly, which is why you often don't feel your joints moving. And if you do feel your joints moving, that's a potential sign of degradation within that hyaline cartilage. Well, the way that hyaline cartilage stays healthy is by, one of the ways is getting those joints to move. Okay. Another way is getting force through those joints. So you need force through the joints. You need the joints to move in order to keep the joints healthy. Okay. But how you go about getting that joint motion is a huge determinant as far as the side effects that can come from attaining that joint motion. If you're attaining joint motion at all costs, or by any means necessary, you may be making yourself potentially more vulnerable to injury through kind of decreasing the muscle's ability to contract and control the joint and stabilize the joint. However, if you're able to create more motion, more mobility through improving the function of the muscular system, getting the muscles to contract better, well, now all of a sudden you're hitting two birds with one stone. You're getting your joints moving better, and you're making sure that the motion that you do have, you're stable in, so you're minimizing your risk for injury, and your joints are going to be better supported. You have your muscles working better in that regard. So I think a lot of times we see this idea, the intentions are good of wanting to reduce injury, but I think we stop, as an industry, we often stop one level short of asking questions. It's like, well, why did they get injured? Because they couldn't move well. Well, why could they not move well? Because they weren't flexible, they weren't mobile. Okay, so we just need, and then that's where we stop, as opposed to taking another level deep and saying, well, why weren't they flexible? Why weren't they mobile to begin with? Could it be that there was some other, neuromuscular thing going on where their muscles couldn't contract well, and that's why their bones couldn't move well? Because at the end of the day, if we think about what in our body is designed to move our bones, it's our muscles. So if we buy into this idea that our muscles move our bones, then I think we also have to buy into the idea that our muscles, if they're not working well, are not going to move our bones. And if we follow that thought process, then a really kind of easy answer a lot of the times, if your bones aren't moving well, is, well, let's get the things that are supposed to move the bones working better. In other words, let's get your muscles working better, and then your bones have the opportunity to move better.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's great, and I think that's gonna lead us right into the idea of, well, okay, I feel like I have this tightness or this pain or something just doesn't feel right in my body. Now I'm thinking that maybe I don't want to stretch into a position that I can't control because I might not be stable there. And I'm hearing now that it might make me more vulnerable to injury. What can I do instead in order to move better, to get my muscles going, like you were talking about?
Yeah.
So find your local MAT specialist.
That's number one, right? Yeah.
Okay.
A number one.
So this is the easiest way to address this would be to seek out help of a professional. And one of the fields of thought that, all three of us participate in is we all practice muscle activation techniques. And muscle activation techniques is truly looking for what muscles are not functioning properly, which muscles are not stable, as we've been talking about, that are causing these other muscles to either experience that tightness sensation that we all really don't like, or it's making that joint feel weird or funky or crunchy or pulling on, or smushing something down or something like that. So find your local MAT specialist, because they'd be really good at pinpointing what needs to be done to address this issue while staying stable and while not compromising the function of other tissues, other muscles.
Yeah, that's, hands down, like that's our top recommendation. Now, some people might be like, well, I don't have anybody in my area. And okay, we're a growing community, so we get that. Like, we're not in every single city and town. So we get that. So another thing that we'll talk to people about is this idea of like reverse stretching. Okay. And so a lot of people are super gung ho about their stretching routine and what they want to do for their stretching. And we try to say, okay, look, if you want to do this stretching routine, totally cool. But what if we made a little tweak to it? So instead of thinking about trying to like lengthen and relax muscles, you can instead focus on the contraction of muscles, which will help improve the stability without creating more vulnerability. And will help increase potentially your mobility without again creating more vulnerability. And so the way, like the classic example is say like a hamstring stretch where you're reaching for your toes, okay? And so the simple switch is instead of thinking about trying to get your hamstrings longer, when you reach for your toes, when you feel like you can't reach further, then just give a little squeeze to the muscles on the opposite side. So instead of your hamstrings trying to get longer, give a little squeeze to your quadriceps, give a little squeeze to your hip flexors, get a little squeeze to your abdominal muscles, instead of thinking about trying to stretch your low back, your glutes, or your hamstrings. And just that slight switch in focus, okay, it makes a huge difference because now all of a sudden you are trying to engage muscles instead of trying to disengage muscles. And if we're talking about protecting your joints and reducing the risk of injury, you want your muscles engaged. You don't want your muscles disengaged so your joints have to take on the stress. You want your muscles engaged so they can help protect those joints. And so that can be a little like a take-home thing or something that somebody can just try on their own. And it's not going to feel like stretching because you'll notice that when you do it, it's going to be a more specific sensation as opposed to like a really elongated, kind of general sensation in the area. So that's number one. And number two, you might notice that you're not moving as far because you're not forcing joint motion. And again, the idea being that we want to try to get your body stronger in the areas where your muscles can work and improve upon that as opposed to trying to force joint motion and create areas where your muscles don't work well. So that's a little thing that we will kind of as a sidebar that we'll talk with our clients about as well, as this idea of like reverse stretching.
Got it. So find a muscle activation techniques specialist or
Yes.
practitioner if
Yep.
you have that near you. And then if you don't, then let's start maybe changing the way we think about what we're doing to improve our range of motion. It sounds like from this pattern that I picked up on is muscle contraction, right? That's the word that's getting thrown around. We want to improve muscle contraction. So it almost seems like we are making a shift from stretching something to strength training can improve mobility and flexibility, because that's the beginning of strength training is muscle contraction. We're just doing it in a very precise and specific way.
Absolutely.
So I love that stable muscle contraction through better, I don't want to say more range of motion because more is not always better, but something that you can control.
People think too, when I brought up the idea of what's appropriate, it's like, that's a good question. It's like, well, what's appropriate? I used to touch my toes, and is that appropriate? But here's the thing. When you try to encourage mobility and flexibility through the lens of stability, meaning you're doing things that create more stability, doing controlled weight training, doing weight training that is not injurious, doing muscle activation techniques, doing reverse stretching type ideas, what happens is your body will give you what it needs. It will give you the motion that it feels that it can tolerate and can be stable in. So that's what's quote unquote appropriate.
Got it. All right. So from the standpoint of, so I work with a lot of equestrian riders and people that ride horses. And from their standpoint, the people that I typically see coming in is for one of two reasons. And this is pretty consistent with all athletes in general. But with the horse riding world, it's one of few sports that you actually have to be symmetrical. The more symmetrical you are, the more beneficial it is, because if you're sitting on a horse with one hip higher than the other and more weight on one side, your one way of communicating to that horse is through what you're doing on your seat, throughout your hands. So it's fascinating because most sports are very rotational in one way. You're doing something the same way over and over. So being able to approach symmetry is very important for this sport. And so what can someone do if they start to notice, I've got a lack of symmetry, and how can I improve this? I know we started talking about muscle contraction, and that's where this thought process of stretching comes, right? Because I feel tight on one side as opposed to the other. And it's this common knowledge that stretching is going to be a way to improve that. But now I'm hearing that it might make me vulnerable when I'm about to go try to use those muscles. So how can we affect getting closer to symmetry or symmetry of control through these things that we're talking about?
Great. So actually, that's a great one because oftentimes when Charlie and I talk to people about signs that you know you need MAT, number one sign is that one side versus the other moves differently or is stronger or weaker than the other, right? So if there's some kind of imbalance of mobility or strength output, I guess we could say. So that being a big sign or indicator that you should go get MAT. Again, MAT will really, really help because it finds the muscles that you can't access when you're exercising that are causing imbalances. But you can also be mindful that you're doing consistent, regular weight training. So many people lose sight of this. Like they're like, hey, well, I don't really care about my muscle mass and I'm not training to be a bodybuilder. So why would I need to lift weights? Weightlifting, weight training in a controlled, safe manner is so important to keep up your muscle health and function. We forget that muscles need to be maintained in terms of their health. I mean, you would never, eat McDonald's every day and expect that, your overall body health will be optimal, right? So the input that you put in your mouth changes how your body's functioning and feeling and operating. Just like the input that you give to your muscles will change how they're functioning. Make sure you're doing your resistance training for the reason and for the goal of function and health of the muscles.
But Julie, I don't want to get jacked. I don't want to be, I need to be able to be elegant when I'm on the horse. If I start lifting weights, aren't I going to just? I'm afraid of getting too muscular, and it's going to tighten me up, right?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a great point. Yes. Because we always think of, right, that muscle jacked, I can't move very well person versus the yogi, right? It's like the two extremes. Right. It's like, okay, well, one person does no weight training and the other person does all weight training in a very specific manner, by the way, because that is a sport. It's not specifically just for health. So yeah, that's a good point.
And it's very fascinating from my end. So for those that don't know, I danced professionally for 6 years before I got into the MAT and fitness world. And throughout my training, I was doing ballet 2 to 3 times a week, which means I was being stretched and I was stretching myself all the time. And I had lots of ankle sprains over and over again. And now I just pretty much do strength training and I get treated by MAT in MAT, and I haven't stretched in probably 6 years, and I'm more mobile and I feel better now. So it's very fascinating what the just strength training can do. And not to say, this is one thing I want to say too, not to say that stretching is bad. I believe that's very similar to an itch. If you get a mosquito bite and you have this itch and you're like, ooh, I want to itch it, and I tell you that the itching is bad, but you're like, but it feels good. Well, maybe for that moment, that feeling good can be exactly what you need in that moment. So I kind of relate to my clients that, hey, we can think of this stretching thing as like, it's something that if you want to do it just because it feels good, that's great. That's fine. But being able to then go back and say, what is the outcome we're trying to get by this stretching, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And one thing that we never ever think about stretching is that stretching is a stress on the body, just like weight training is, right? But we try to say, hey, I'm going to use this stress to create some kind of positive outcome, right? Some muscle building or function building. But for some reason with stretching, it's always like more is better. But you would never say that about weight training, right? Like more is better, just keep going, more weight. You would never say that. And so there's an appropriateness to it. It's like, well, how much should I be stretching and for what reason? And I would say for most people that are using stretching for health related goals, well, then if you're going to stretch, it should be very, very light. Don't use it to use like a pain relieving outcome goal. But as you mentioned, like as a dancer, I think that there are some sports that stretching is number one part of the culture. And number two, maybe mandatory to get these extreme ranges of motion. Like I used to also be a dancer, but you could also think about it in terms of gymnasts or ice skaters, where they're doing these extreme unnatural motions, right? Motions that, a body really shouldn't be doing. And remember, you're not doing them for health reasons. You're doing them for the external appearance reason. And so the goal has to be, especially for professionals like us, is, hey, you're doing a sport where you have to do a whole bunch of unnatural stuff with your body, and that requires stretching. And we have to remember stretching is a stress. And so what can we do to help mitigate that stress on the body so that you can keep doing this thing that you enjoy doing, which, by the way, getting your leg to the back of your head probably isn't healthy if you keep doing it for a really long time. But I understand people enjoy it, right? I loved it. You probably loved it. Ice skaters love it. So what can we do to make sure you stay healthy and as safe as possible when you're doing this stretching or doing these extreme motions?
Got it. And I feel like that leads right into why we end up working with the age group of people we do, because you can tolerate it when you're young. But when you start turning 30, you're like, something starts to ache. And then 40, you're like, that aching thing's bothering more. Than 50. And you're like, well, I don't know if I can do this thing I used to love anymore. So even though we're younger, we could tolerate it. As you get older, you're definitely able to notice that more and more because your body can only handle so much. And we only get one set of joints.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly.
I'm going to throw you a quick curveball here of something that you said earlier. Okay. This is a big one for me and my curiosity as well. So we talked about stability, and one of you mentioned, I think Julie, you mentioned a balance board. Okay. So if I am someone who wants to improve my balance is a very important thing in a sport. I'm seeing a lot of stuff that says I need to put unstable things underneath me, like a ball or a balance board, to improve my balance. Could you explain a little bit the thought process on improving your balance? And do I need to be juggling things? Do I need to be wobbling on things to improve my balance?
Well, I'll start and then you go ahead. Exactly. So I think one thing that needs to be acknowledged about balance is that balance is a skill, okay, which is why it's something that can be improved. And so in order to improve a skill, I think you also need to look at, well, what are the different component parts of that skill? And then can we improve those different component parts and then kind of practice putting the skill together as a whole? I think a lot of times when it comes to balance, we neglect the former and we go right for the latter. We neglect the building the component parts and we go right for, let's just put it all together, practicing the skill. All right. It's like trying to talk a language without learning all the words first. Once you learn the words, then you can learn how to, put a sentence structure. All right, which I'm clearly not that good at, but you can start to learn how to correctly form a sentence to communicate your ideas. But if you don't have any words to begin with, it makes it really difficult. And I feel like with balance, we jump to, well, let's go to the putting it all together part without the let's get the component parts. So what are the component parts? All right, the component parts, one big one is strength. What's the strength? How strong are your toes? How strong are your feet? How strong are your ankles? Are your knees? Are your hips? Is your trunk? How strong are each of those areas? Because what you're asking each area of your body to do is to control that center of mass and keep it over your base of support. So the stronger those areas are, the better they're going to be able to control your center of mass over your base of support. So that's a big one, looking at strength. Another component part that we can look at is I'm going to call the familiarity of having your body in different positions. All right, in whether it's on one leg or whether it is seated upright on a horse. I mean, I haven't ridden on a horse in 20 years, so it would feel really unfamiliar to me if I did that. But if I did it for a couple weeks, it would feel more familiar because now I have started to learn how to control my body on the horse like that. I don't need to stand on, a foam pad or something like that in order to improve my ability to do that. I need some familiarity with where my body's going to be, and I need the necessary strength in order to be able to control my body. And then once we get those two things, then I think we can start to implement the combination of it all, of actually doing the thing or doing some other kind of balance exercises in order to help improve that. Now, is there possibly some benefit to using a balance board or something like that to help improve your stability? What good might that do? Well, it might put you in an environment where you have to learn how to change or how to manage your center of mass over your base of support in an environment that fluctuates. All right. Practicing that skill might be a good thing, all right? But I don't think it's the only thing, and I don't think that's step number one. I think that's like step number 27 for a lot of people, and we're putting it as, oh, Mrs. Jones wants to improve her balance because she's worried about falling or slipping on ice, so let's put her on this board. And it's like, there's a lot that needs to be done before that, or a lot that can be done before that.
And so hearing that, it makes me start to believe that we have these two components, which both are a skill, which is improving your strength. And then if I want to improve my familiarity or proprioception of awareness of my body in space, it seems like it would make a lot of sense to do that on the actual thing and in the skill that I'm desiring to do. So therefore, being a horse rider, I could potentially then focus on strength and then the actual skill, because the only way I feel like I'm going to be able to learn how to do a very specific thing is if I'm doing that specific thing. And that might be the best practice for my awareness, is to get exactly in that environment as opposed to trying to emulate something that's kind of close to it.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely there's a lot of truth to that. I think from what I recall from my motor control class in graduate school, appears to be benefit to putting yourself in related but not replicated environments. Okay, what do I mean by that? Is like, well, for example, shooting a basketball. There appears to be benefit to shooting a basketball from a bunch of different spots on the floor in order to improve your shooting overall. Okay. But I don't know that, say, like shooting a medicine ball is going to help you shoot a basketball better, right? So there's some, we need it like generally to be the same, but there appears to be some benefit in having variability in that as well, from the learning how to control your body in different positions standpoint.
Absolutely. And then also when people are training this whole balance thing, that just to build off of what Charlie had mentioned, is that I often hear from clients when we're doing something that involves balance, they'll say something like, "I'm just so bad at balancing, don't you see?" And what they're telling me to see is their wobble, their muscles adjusting, their feet wiggling, their toes grasping the ground. And here's the thing, that is balance. Like working through that wobble, that squeezing the ground, that clenching your toes, that is balance. That is the outcome of balance. We think balance is, oh, I look like a ballerina when I'm on one toe with my leg up in the air and there's actually zero wobble. But when you look at dancers, their muscles, I mean, they've practiced it a billion times, but you'll see that little variance. They're working to balance, to not fall over. And really, if you're not falling over, you're balancing. And if you did fall over and you were kind of working on not falling over, you were practicing your balance. You were working on that skill of balance.
Got it. So improving the skill of the strength and the balance, and just because I'm moving doesn't mean I'm not balancing. I could actually be improving that skill, even though it may seem I'm not in statuesque posture.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Very nice. Very nice. I have one more question here for you guys, and I think this one is my favorite and can be applicable to anybody that's over the age of 30. I myself love to compete and still love to be athletic. And I know we have to take even more care of ourselves as we age to be able to do those things. So what advice would you give to a busy, driven adult who loves to get the most out of their playtime? And what advice should maybe they ignore? So maybe some actionable takeaways so that they can get the most out of what they love to do.
Well, one thing I want to throw out is don't let yourself just be a weekend warrior. All right. If you like playing pickup basketball or something on the weekends, that's totally fine. Go after it, but do something during the week to keep your body conditioned, to keep your strength up, to keep your cardiovascular fitness up, so that the the doing of the thing isn't also the thing where you are like the only thing you're doing to try to improve your body. All right. The thing that the general public rarely realizes about professional athletes is how much time they spend trying to get their body working better and trying to keep their body working well. And so we see them when the lights are on and the crowd is there and they're out doing that thing, whether it's playing a basketball game or something like that. And we miss all the other hours they spend trying to prepare for that, trying to recover from that, just so they can go out and do that one thing. And they're playing like a high level of minutes in the NBA is, like 35 plus. Are you kidding me? Who goes out and plays 35 minutes of pickup basketball? People are playing 2 hours of pickup basketball. And it's like, what are you doing? You think you can just, like be at your office all week and then, Saturday morning you can go play pickup basketball for 2 hours? You can't do that. So you have to put time throughout your week where you're focused on trying to build the health and function of your body, whether that's through resistance training, some type of separate cardiovascular training, getting your body work done, tuned up with MAT, muscle activation techniques. But I think that's a really big thing is if you have something that you really like, that's fine, but don't let that be the only thing that you do. Have that be the reason why you're doing all the other stuff.
Yeah, Charlie and I once did a podcast called The Exercise Pyramid. And I actually thought of this name because I was like, how can I portray this idea to people of, the exercise that's mandatory and the exercise that's the icing on the cake. It's just fun. It's something you enjoy. It's the stuff you get to lick off first,
Mhm.
And so what it is that the foundation is you have to maintenance your muscles through regular resistance training and
MAT.
MAT.
Yep.
So you got to maintenance your muscle system. That's the things you have to do every week, twice a week if you can. Get your resistance training and do something that encourages the health and function of your muscles. And then optional to that, because this is not just only geared toward your health, is your sport, is the fun class that you're going to go do, is the ballroom dance class that you're going to do with your spouse or whatever it is the horseback riding. Those are the things that we're saying you're using your body, you're doing something with your body. And the foundation exercises, which are the resistance training and MAT, is hey, I'm making sure that this is staying healthy, staying well, staying functional.
Yeah, so a lot of times we'll kind of categorize this as exercise, like Julie said, that uses your body versus exercise that builds or rebuilds your body. And so if you're going to have exercise where you're focused on using your body, you have to have exercise where you're focused on building or rebuilding your body. Now, a lot of times people will say, well, I'm always using my body when I'm exercising. And that's true. But here's the thing. It's the intent and the focus that's different between the two that makes it different. Meaning, when you go and play pickup basketball, you're not focusing on like squeezing your hamstrings as hard as you can, or
That'd be exhausting.
right, exactly. Thinking like, oh, I gotta stay on my guy when I'm playing defense. I'm going to sprint down the court. It's all these things that are external to your body, and you're using your body to accomplish this external goal. Versus doing things that build or rebuild your body, the focus is internal. So when you're doing resistance training, you have the opportunity of thinking, I'm going to squeeze my hamstrings as hard as I can during this exercise. I'm going to squeeze my quads. I'm going to squeeze my abs. Whatever it is, your focus is what's going on within your body, which then gives you the opportunity to build your body, because that's where your focus is. And then once you build your body, now you have the opportunity to go and use your body the way you want to use it.
That is gold. I feel like out of anything we said today, the last 3 minutes, I took away the most from, because it's the one thing that I hear consistently as well. I'm spending my time doing this thing, therefore I don't need exercise. So the idea, or extra exercise, and I'm getting my exercise. So this idea that we have a exercise of using our muscles versus rebuilding or building our muscles. And in that same category, an external performance of our muscles during our sport versus an internal building, I think is fascinating, and is super important for me to hear that, even though I know I haven't necessarily heard it like that, and I think it's super valuable. So I really appreciate that insight. And do you two have any other closing words or recommendations or thoughts you'd like to impart on the audience before we close this conversation?
I'll just kind of leave off with is, I think so often and Julie and I have been talking about this a lot recently, is that like when something feels weird in your body or we feel like we have a problem in our body, a lot of times we try to jump to more extreme conclusions. And the muscular system is so incredibly powerful at helping your body feel better, helping your body perform better. And if you just take a little bit of time throughout your week to make sure that your muscles are working well and do some things to help build the function of your muscles, that can go so far as helping your body continue to feel well and helping your body continue to perform well. So if there's one thing that I would like to leave your listeners with, is take some time throughout your week where you are doing things to improve the health and function of your muscles. And that will just pay dividends, not only in the short term, but in the long term as you age. One of the most definitive signs of aging is the losing the ability to do the things you want to do in life. And one way to make sure that to kind of stack the deck in your favor to keep doing the things you want to do is make sure that your muscles stay working well through something like muscle activation techniques, through regular strategic resistance training. And it's made a world of difference in our clients' lives. It's what made a world of difference in our own lives when we started changing how we thought about exercise and when we started changing how we were doing exercise. And that's what we see across the board, is when people really start focusing on the health and function of the muscles, all the things that they thought were issues before, whether it's arthritis or whether it's tightness throughout their body or something like that, all that stuff really starts to, for a large part, the issues start to go away because your body and your joints are better supported through the health and function of your muscular system.
Mm-hmm. I have nothing to add to that. Good job, Charlie.
Well said. Well, thank you so much, Julie and Charlie, for taking the time to hang out with me and talk and share your knowledge with our audience. I appreciate it very much.
You
Absolutely.
bet.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Michael.
My pleasure. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this show, please do me a favor and share it with someone that you know would benefit from this information. Also, go ahead and check out Julie and Charlie. They have an amazing podcast on iTunes called Exercise is Health, and then you can find them as well on Instagram or Facebook at Muscle Activation Schaumburg, and Schaumburg is spelled SCHAUMBURG. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you guys picked up some good ideas and good thoughts on flexibility and mobility in this episode. I thought we did a really good dive deep into dispelling some myths and bringing some truth to some of the reality about it, because I think a lot of times, obviously it's hard to figure out what's what when you're consuming information about exercise, when that platform is so flooded with information. So we hope that helped clarify, and we will definitely be putting Michael's contact information in the show notes in case you want to connect with him, in case you want to engage with him. I know he does have some very specific programming for the equestrian community and also obviously aging athletes.
So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that is looking to improve their flexibility, that's looking to stay mobile as they age? Share this episode with them so they can learn about our take and our viewpoints on both of those subjects. And while you're online, if you wouldn't mind, head on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. It helps people find this content when they are looking for podcasts on exercise and when they're looking for podcasts on health. So if you enjoyed this conversation today, let us know by leaving us that 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week.